Hello, welcome to Chem 120. Another day, another problem, same shirt. Here we go. Naming. Today we're doing naming. There are different types of naming. The first type that we're going to look at is metal and non-metal. The rules are similar, but there's small changes between places on the periodic table. So a metal such as calcium chloride, right? We see this is the metal, so we name the metal first. We look up Ca and the symbol is for calcium. And then chloride. Because calcium has a +2 charge, if we look at the ions, this is Ca2 plus 2Cl minus, right? So in order to have a non-charged stable species, we put 2 chlorines with 1 calcium. But we know the charge on calcium, so to charge balance, we just call this calcium chloride. All right? So you take the metal name and then the non-metal name and you change it to ending to ide, I-D-E. So you go from chlorine to chloride. Now, the second type is a metal and a polyatomic ion. We've seen 24 that you're supposed to know by sight or memorize, right? By rote. So let's look at this one, CS2SO4. Now, we have to look this metal up. It's a first row metal or an alkali metal. It has a charge of 1, so CS plus 1. There's 2 of them. And then the SO4 or sulfate anion is 2 minus. So we write the name of the metal first, cesium, and since this is a known quantity, we just have to call it by its name, sulfate. Cesium sulfate. So we've covered a metal and a non-metal, a metal and a polyatomic ion. They both start with the name of the metal and then end with the non-metal or polyatomic ion. Right? The next set is a transition metal. And a non-metal. Okay, so in this case, all right, RHO3. Now, with transition metals, we don't know the charge. Unlike columns 1 and 2, where we know the charge, cesium's +1, calcium's 2 plus, we have no idea what the charge on this rhodium is until we look at the anion, oxygen. Oxygen is always 2 minus. On this problem, there are 3 oxygens. So 3 times 2 minus is +6. So in order to charge balance this compound, it has to be rhodium 6. And so we have to say that. Rhodium 6, and then that's just oxide. Because oxygen is always -2, we know there's going to be 3 of them if this is rhodium 6. So that's how you name that compound. The next transition metal complex is transition metal polyatomic anion. And one thing we know is metals are positively charged because they tend to lose electrons. And anions are negatively charged because they tend to gain electrons. All these compounds are, so far, are ionic compounds. The metal donates an electron to the non-metal or donates an electron to the anion. In this case, with the polyatomic anion, let's look at platinum. All right. Now we should know this polyatomic anion as hypochlorite. So we will add platinum 2 plus and 2 ClO minus, right? When we write the name, we write platinum 2 hypochlorite, which is just the name of the anion. But we always use Roman numerals, only with the transition metals. We don't use them with the metals in groups 1 and 2, but only with the transition metals. Now there's a third type of bonding, and that's non-metal and non-metal. These are covalent bonds, which is sharing. Remember, when you're talking about metal and non-metal, and metal and polyatomic ion, and transition metal and non-metal, and transition metal and polyatomic anion, you're talking ionic bonds. Metals give up their electrons, anions and non-metals take electrons. But when two non-metals get together, they share electrons. That's what covalent means, sharing electrons. So when we name a non-metal compound like NO2, we have to describe both things because they're shared. So when there's only one N and it comes in the front, we just use the name nitrogen. Now, there are two oxygens, so we say dioxide. So when we're using non-metal bonds, we use nitrogen, the name of the first non-metal, and then if there's more than one of them, we use the prefixes, di, tri, hex, pent, octa, like that. So let's look at another one of those. We look on our periodic table and we see there are two phosphorus. Well, when there's more than one in the front, diphosphorus. Oh boy. And penta for 5, oxide. Right? So we use prefixes when it's non-metal, non-metal. We do not use these prefixes for any other compounds. Not for the metal, non-metal, not for the transition metal, polyatomic. Only for non-metal, non-metal do we use di, tri, penta. We only use Roman numerals for transition metals. And we don't use anything for the known metal, non-metal bonds. All right, so that's naming in a nutshell. Thank you for your time.